Hi, I'm Peggy Farron, and you're watching the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. Welcome to episode 129. We're going to talk with travel photographer and blogger Kirsten Hines about abstract photography in nature. However, before we do that, make sure you go to our website and sign up for one of our freebies. It's understandphotography.com. And if you heard me, I said understand. There's no ing. It's not understanding, it's understand. Photography.com. It's a command, okay? Anyway, we have several different downloads and videos that you can watch for free in exchange for signing up for our mailing list. We send out a newsletter once a month. This is on Facebook, YouTube, and as a podcast. So listen to us on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, the whole 9 yards. Reviews on iTunes help us more than anything, so we really, really appreciate it. So we're going to talk with Kirsten Hines. Kirsten's a photographer, an environmental educator, and a travel blogger who has, oh my gosh, she's been on every continent, and she's an author of 5 books. She's amazing. So welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And I was going through your blog today. It's amazing. How have you been all over the world? You said you started traveling very young. Or you weren't even raised in this country.
No, I was raised in the Philippines. So, you know, when you move overseas at a young age, you kind of get hooked, and it's hard to be in one place, in fact. So I've actually, Miami, I've been in South Florida for longer than I've been anywhere. And I was kind of shocked the other day to realize it's been almost 20 years. I was like, whoa, when did that happen?
Been in Miami?
Because before that, it was every 3 years I moved. So, yeah. So you do, though, once you've lived overseas, it's very hard to not keep going back and trying to travel and see new things and be new places.
Travel, boy, once you start, you get the bug, right?
Yes, you do.
That's awesome. So where was your last trip?
Actually, my last trip was up in the Arctic to see polar bears.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which was very cool. Last year actually was a big one. It wasn't intentional, but I ended up going to Africa, and then a week later going up to the Arctic. And so it was last year was a big one.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very cool. And we went to one really special place where we got to see an interaction between polar bears and wolves. It was a kind of a meeting place where the boreal forest meets the tundra. And so there was a mixing of species that you wouldn't normally expect. And it was really exciting to watch the interactions between the wolves and the polar bears. And yeah, it was very cool.
Did they fight, or did they?
Initially, it was a big polar bear initially, big male. And we're walking. It was a walking safari that we were on. And so my husband and I. And so when we were out there, the polar bear came out to meet the pack of wolves as they came, and they surrounded the polar bear, but the polar bear kind of lunged at them and held its own. And so the rest of the pack left, and it was kind of, I have this picture I love that's nose to nose, the wolf versus the polar bear.
Oh my God.
And then they all kind of wandered off, and then we followed one of the wolves and watched it catch and eat a snow goose. And then as it's eating, a really small polar bear comes and chases it off, and then a big wolf comes and chases that polar bear off, and then the big polar bear came back and chased, and this is all happening you could practically pet them as they were running by. I mean, it was just all coming really close.
Are you scared?
No, I wasn't actually. I was scared for the polar bear at first. When the wolves all surrounded, I was like, oh no!
But you weren't afraid?
But I wasn't. I mean, partly we had guides with us that really knew what they were doing, and we had already been out for 10 days watching polar bears, and it's amazing. I mean, you know that they're these huge predators, but it turns out they're these super kind, curious. I mean, not kind, if you didn't play it right, they wouldn't be, I'm sure. But the guides, their first level of defense was to talk to them. Oh. And then they would up the ante by throwing a snowball at them, and they would go running. I mean, really, it was kind of amazing to be with one of these huge predators, and a snowball was enough to make them run.
Oh, wow.
So that was a really exciting trip.
Wow, that is.
So.
Now, we had a guy on our show named Daniel Cox. You have to look up his website. He has a polar bear project.
Oh, cool.
So he's really into the polar bears, and he lives up, I forget where he lives, but it's cold wherever he lives.
No doubt.
I'm not living anywhere cold.
No, that was one of the struggles. You had to put so many layers on, and my big disappointment actually was the day that all happened. It was really snowing hard, and so I didn't want to have both. I normally carry 2 camera bodies out in case action gets close, and this was one of those cases where I had kept my my wider angle lens in so that it wouldn't get covered in snow. And it was just so hard to carry all these things when you're already bundled. I felt like the abominable snowman. And so when the chase came that close, I don't have a picture of the two running in the same frame because they were too close. And I was like, no.
Oh man.
So.
Okay, so when did you start your blog?
Oh, wow, that's been up for a few years now. Probably 2015 or 2016.
And how often do you blog?
The goal is once a month, but if I'm on the road, sometimes I'm a little slack. But the goal is once a month that there's going to be one coming out.
Reasonable to me. Do you know who Artie Morris is? He's a very famous bird photographer.
I know the name. I'm not.
Now, he doesn't do it every single day, but he blogs almost every day. Like out of how many days are there in a year? 356?
365.
65? Look at me. See, I told you I'm losing my mind. Anyway, I mean, he probably does 360.
Wow.
I mean, he's crazy.
Wow.
He's so disciplined. And he travels probably as much as you do.
Yeah, I get overwhelmed. But if I have too many deadlines, I'm like, okay, a little bit of space here. So I try not to commit to more than I can handle.
I tend to blog in chunks. Like we'll do a day where we'll do videos and blogs and then
it's wise.
Schedule them, and then, in fact, this is the first show in a while because I was traveling a little bit.
Yeah.
So, So now, do you make money off the blog, or is
I haven't done that. I mostly was. When I first put it up, it was to try and show samples of my work when I was pitching to magazines and stuff. So, but I've actually been really so involved in books since I started that I haven't done much of that, although I intend to get into that this year. But so initially it was mostly just to have samples of my work out there.
Okay.
And I've continued doing it because people seem to appreciate it. But really my goal is to do more in magazines now. But I have so many book deadlines, I find it hard to spend the time pitching new ideas. But I need to do that because that's the books come out once every few years, and so you need to have things in between as well.
So tell me your books.
So I got into photography when I was working on a gardening for wildlife book for South Florida. It's called Attracting Birds to South Florida Gardens. So I started taking pictures for that. And then also at the same time, Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden in Miami had just started a bird conservation program, and they were creating a coffee table book for that. So I started taking all the photography for that book. So those were my first two books. And really I hadn't thought about doing more with photography. It was just, I had been a biologist before that. I had helped write these books. We needed illustrations, and I knew I liked photography because I had spent 3 years traveling and had decided I really liked the trying to take photos, but of course I was on the road. I had no money, so I didn't buy a real camera until I started those books. And so that was kind of my chance to really dive in. And then afterwards people kept asking me, well, can we buy your photos? And I was like, oh, okay, well, we can do this.
That's how I got started selling my stuff as art. Somebody asked me to buy something. I was like,
really?
Okay.
That's very funny.
Oh, wow. So that's two. I want to hear the other three books.
So the other, one of them is a trail guide, also to go with the coffee table book for the Fairchild Bird Program. And then one of them is a history of Key Biscayne. So it's not my photography, it's all historic photos, and that was where I was living at the time. So it's one of the Arcadia series, Images of America. You see them everywhere, the little sepia tone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you
pictures. So I have one on Key Biscayne, and then as I was working on that one, I called Biscayne National Park about a photo that they had on their website. And they were like, oh, well, if you're doing books, we would really like to have one done for Biscayne National Park because it's going to be our 50th anniversary. Oh, nice. So that one came out last year. And that one was really cool because it was in that same history series, but because it was celebrating their 50th anniversary, they let us do an unusual mix. And so the first 2/3 of the book are history, and then the last entire chapter is my photography as the park is today. So that was cool. And actually it made me get out of my comfort zone a little bit because I tend to be very wildlife focused. I don't do other types of photography. And this was like, no, I have to represent what the park means to everyone, not just to me. To me it's wildlife, but there's other people who like to go fishing, and I mean I like to go fishing too, but you know, like for me, if I was just there taking
Yep.
pictures for myself, it would be all wildlife photos. So this was, okay, I'm going to take pictures of people and buildings and a little bit of everything.
Wow, that's awesome. I need to get your first book because I just got a bird feeder, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, and I love it. Right, Heather? I was sitting in there, I'm like, Mrs. Painted Bunting is back! Oh my God, there's a hummingbird!
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's amazing.
I look out the window, you know, it's so much fun.
And I recently moved, and we ripped literally everything out of the yard and started over, and there were no birds when we moved in, and now we've got tons of birds, and so it's so exciting to be like, yes, it works, it works.
So fun, those painted buntings when
They're beautiful.
But he's like, you know, I thought the birds were supposed to mate for life. This guy has
Oh no, most of them do not.
This guy's got women, man. He's got females.
Oh yeah,
not
no.
just one.
Yeah, mating for life is very unusual in in the world. There's
that's-
always
yeah.
at least something on the side.
Okay. See, I didn't know that because I heard that, but I'm not a birder, so. No, is when you did the Biscayne thing, is that when you kind of did this, started saying, I can see abstracts in nature?
Yeah, well, actually, I think that started before that. I think when I first really started thinking about abstracts was when I was in Antarctica. And it's such a crazy environment. I mean, I grew up in tropics, and so to be there surrounded by ice, the landscape is just, to me, so abstract looking to begin with. And you spend a lot of time on the boat as well, and so everything's moving all the time. And it was a combination of being in such an environment I'd never been in, and in conditions I'd never really tried to do photographs in before. And I just decided, and one of the lead photographers on the trip, it was a National Geographic trip, and so we had Ralph Lee Hopkins along, and he was experimenting. You know, he was doing like when the dolphins would come on the side, he would do a slow pan, and his pictures just looked amazing. They had kind of the feeling of what the dolphins looked like they were experiencing playing in the water, and it got me thinking about, wow, well, you know, I've been, because of my biology background and because I started off doing these books where I really wanted to demonstrate exactly how things looked, my photos I would describe initially were all very documentary style.
Right.
Like, I need it to look very crisp and clean, and so people can look at the details of the bird or of the behavior or of the interaction. But there, when I was on this anti-Arctic cruise, I was like, I want to convey the feeling of being here and the kind of, you know, the mystery of this environment, and it feels abstract. There's no sense of scale when you're surrounded by ice. You know, you don't have, you just feel like you're kind of in a different element, and I wanted to start conveying what that felt like. And so partly watching Ralph Lee Hopkins photos and how he was doing it, and then also just being kind of immersed in this completely new situation, I started thinking more about the art and how you could go to a different level in the photography, and thinking more about, well, what's the story I want to tell with this, and what's the emotion I want people to feel? I want them to feel like they were here.
Okay.
So I have one picture, for example, of an iceberg that was just, the top was out of the water, and it looked like this ice tunnel. And I was like, you know, this sense of, you don't know how big it is, you know, but you can see there's this sort of light at the end of the tunnel, but you don't even know how big the tunnel is. And so I took a picture of that. And so I started looking into these little details of the landscape and being like, wow, but it, you know, when you just lose the sense of context, it becomes a totally different thing. But it was the way I felt in the moment, you know. And so I wanted to share that.
That's cool. You know what, it's funny because I don't do a lot of abstract in nature, but I just went to Cuba and they took us to Fusterlandia, which is this artist crazy thing. And it's not very photogenic. It's cool, but it's not, you know, I was kind of annoyed because it wasn't on our schedule and they just took us there, right?
You're like, there's nothing to take a picture of here.
It's Cuba. You kind of go with the flow when you're in Cuba. But anyway, I took one picture kind of abstract, but it wasn't that abstract. But when Heather was looking, she was helping me decide on pictures for the artist studio tour, and she looked at it sideways, and she's like, this is really cool. And I'm like, but sideways, it was cool.
Yeah.
Because I was just like trying different things because I couldn't find anything to photograph in there.
Yep.
Even though it was amazing, because the guy's an amazing artist, but it's all mosaics. He did his house, then he keeps adding onto his house. But
all painting.
No, it's mosaics.
Oh, like literally tiles everywhere. Wow.
But now it's the whole neighborhood.
Oh my gosh.
I have been there before. I just didn't have it on this tour because it's not photogenic. So when they took us there, I wasn't too happy, but whatever. They took us to, legally you have to hire a Cuba tour guide.
Of course.
A lot of people don't do it that way, but we like to obey the laws. And they take you to places where you'll buy things. So,
Not a surprise.
Yeah, but it's still cool. Everybody enjoyed it, but that piece of artwork was like, I have some abstract stuff, but that was really cool. And when she flipped it sideways, I would have never thought of doing that. So just looking for it, like you said, you saw the tunnel because you were looking for it. If you weren't looking for it, you might not have
No, that's
seen
exactly
it,
right. That's exactly right.
And I was looking for something to photograph because I'm the leader of this tour. I took them here supposedly, even though I had no control. And
even though it might not have been on the top of your list.
I have to make sure
or even on the list.
Yeah, I got to get some good pictures. So I was searching, and that's what came out. So, okay, all right, look, all of my questions, I'm looking at this. And it's, what else you said that really I would like to just focus on a little bit is that you got inspired by this other photographer. Because one of the things I always tell people is you got to get out and shoot with other photographers because they have a different eye that can open up your eyes.
Yeah, it's true.
And a lot of nature photographers and wildlife photographers are very, very solitary type of people that they just prefer to be alone out in nature. They don't want to be with anybody else.
And and that makes sense too. I started as a biologist, so I've spent a lot of time in the woods by myself, which is very comfortable for me. And also I get to be closer to the animals if it's just me, right? Because it's quieter. But really to be inspired and learn new techniques and stuff. I really think my photography monumentally got better on that trip, and that was partly being surrounded by all of these other photographers and seeing what they were doing. And I would say also I was born in Seattle. And so Art Wolf is from Seattle, and of course, very famous wildlife photographer, and who has always pushed the limits. And I actually started as an artist, and then got into photography and got into wildlife photography through that avenue. So kind of the exact opposite of me, right? But he always had done these really creative. His photos were just much more creative than most, and there was a lot more artistry in his as well. And so I think seeing what Ralph Lee Hopkins was doing was kind of like harking back to Art Wolf's influence on me when I was little and loving wildlife and loving art. Not that I had any art training, but it appealed to me. And actually after that, after I came back, Art Wolf was in Miami, and he gave one of his workshops on photography as art. And he actually had abstracts that he took from Cuba of like old cars, like the rust on the cars, the paint and stuff that he just really zoomed in, and you would have thought it was a painting. And so I think having all of those influences really made a difference. I don't know that I would have come to this if I hadn't been on that trip where I was shooting with other photographers.
Yeah, I think it's just really important that people need to and like we offer a free photo walk once a month, trying to just
very cool.
give people a chance to practice, and they don't have to pay anything. And
just
we say almost free because sometimes we go places that have an admission
fee.
charge. We don't charge. So when you're taking abstract photos, so that kind of got you going.
Yeah.
And now do you feel like you look for it more?
I tend to be opportunistic. It's when I'm struck by it, and a lot of times it's if I've come to a new place that I've never been before, especially a place like the glaciers, for example, but also like a desert. When I went to this huge desert in United Arab Emirates, and I'd never spent time in the desert before, and there were these huge dunes, and I was in the middle of a sandstorm, and so the sand was just moving, and again, it was like, wow, I've never experienced any of this. And it was a way to not be overwhelmed by it, but to explore it more deeply in a kind of directed way where I felt like I was looking for things that would help show what I was experiencing.
So what were you looking for in the desert on the dunes?
Yeah,
there's not a lot going on,
partly
right?
I was looking for wildlife, and the first trip where I went now twice to the desert there because I was so intrigued by it. But the first time it was all about the shadows on the desert and the moving sand. So I have a series that I call the Shifting Sand series, where I used long shutter speed exposures to let the sand move. I wasn't panning; I just let the sand move across, and you can see it in the pictures. It's like this softness going through, and looking for the lines in the dunes. And so that was part of what was intriguing me. And again, this lack of scale. I think there's something that inspires the abstract when it's like, wow, there's no, my normal senses aren't there.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
what
kind
I
of
would imagine, and I've never been anywhere. I don't go cold places, so I probably will never go to Antarctica.
Well,
but-
I've gone twice, and it's bucket list stuff. Antarctica, I had to get my last continent, and Arctic, I
Yeah.
had to go see polar bears.
Yeah.
So.
But I have been to White Sands. Have you been there in
I
New
have not,
Mexico? Oh my
actually.
God, it's amazing. But I felt like, I took some pictures that I was okay with, but I felt like I didn't have the right lens on me. And you don't change your lens. And
No, this is why yeah, well, and actually in that sandstorm, even though I only had the one camera out, but it was I had my 100 to 400 lens on, and let me tell you, that nearly didn't make it, just because the sand was pummeling. It was for 2 days after. There was nothing I could do about it. I tried to clean it as much as I could, but you could hear it crunching as I was extending my lens in and out. It was like crunch, 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 crunch. I was like, oh no. It made it. I got it home and sent it in for proper cleaning, and it survived.
Do you go to Isaac at Southern Photo Technical Service?
I sent it into Canon.
Oh. Because
Yeah.
he's right there in North Miami.
Oh no, I'll have to
you
take
gotta-
that information
he's
down.
Awesome. I got all those brochures right here around the corner.
No, I will pick one up. Yeah, that would be great.
But I had just a wide lens with me, and it was the wrong lens for the dunes, you know, because you want to compress those hills and.
It's true.
but,
It's true. You need a little bit of compression there. But yeah, I think I find with the abstracts in particular, I don't necessarily go in looking for it, but I get inspired. So another example, I was in Costa Rica taking photographs of Egami Herons, which are these very hard to find. People who've lived in Costa Rica their whole lives have never even heard of the Egami Heron. It's this really ancient heron, like one of the more older forms of heron. And it was amazing. We were in this rookery, and they would fly up and down like it was a helicopter. Just straight up, straight down, very slow.
Oh my God.
Like no heron I've ever seen before. And I had started off by trying to just take it quick, freeze frame, right? And then I was like, well, but if I'm doing that, I'm missing, like you can't tell how it's flying. It just looks like I've caught it mid-flight. And so then I tried a slow pan, and I was able to capture it kind of more or less moving up, and you could see where the blur came from. And so you had this sense of its movement. But it was an inspiration at the moment. I wasn't looking for an abstract, but it occurred to me that was the best way to tell that story. So I think it's very situational and very inspiration-based. Like, I'm looking for a good way to tell the story I want to tell with the photograph, and sometimes the best way to tell it is in an abstract way.
And you're bringing up another point. I always like to have the little stories or the little teaching points in. But you need to learn how to shoot in the manual mode. And so many people are learning an aperture priority and not really understanding what they're doing, and it's really hard to do. You're limiting yourself as a photographer when you're not shooting in the manual mode, or at least not understanding how to do it quickly, because obviously you didn't have a lot of time to decide what you're going to do in that picture, because you don't know how long that bird's going to
up and down. Yeah.
So you need
or even sometimes what I advise people is like, look, if you're not comfortable going all the way to manual, just know when it's better to be on aperture priority versus shutter priority. Know when to switch between those two at the very least.
Too.
Because I do find a lot of times with my wildlife work, I am on one of those two modes because I don't want to be controlling.
Wildlife goes fast.
Yeah, I don't want to be controlling everything. When the time is right, if it's a complicated, I will absolutely switch into manual. But you don't have to. You can get by, but you do have to know what priority should you be in.
And you have to understand. I think if you learn to shoot in manual, then you understand
Absolutely.
what the three components are doing together, and you know what to do.
How the interplay is, which is essential.
One of the things we always do in Cuba is we do panning. We always do that with the old cars. And, it's really hard to do in any other mode, but then we'll do the other thing where we'll have the cars blurry and leave something still. Just
mix it up.
Just looking for something unique to do, because the old cars are really cool and everybody likes them. So how can you make them?
And everybody goes to photograph them.
Yeah, and how can you make them a little different?
Yeah, exactly.
And what can you do? And so now, do you feel like you look for lines or patterns? Is that something that goes through your mind, or?
Yeah, yes, it does. A lot of times for me, it ends up being motion is what's calling to me.
Okay.
But like this, when I was in Africa this last time, I became absolutely obsessed with this idea that zebras each individually had their own patterns.
Yeah.
And so I found myself looking for the right combination of patterns to capture that story. And I ended up with a photo that I love of a bunch of zebras in the water, and it's their butts. But
a butt shot.
it's a butt shot, but the reason it's a butt shot is because the tail, if you look at the tail, each tail has a really, really strong pattern, and it was the place that was most obvious that the stripes were different. But it needed to be that really bold pattern to be able to see it. So yeah, I'm looking for lines, I'm looking for shapes, and I'm looking, a lot of times it's movement for me, because that's part of, I'm looking at the animals and how are they interacting with each other. And so again, even those zebras, it was kind of an interaction between the different animals. But in this case, it was, I wanted to look at their patterns and the differences in their patterns. And sometimes it's, how are they interacting, with motion, the behaviors, or with the environment. If they're on the ocean, for example, and I want to show that they're flying over the waves or something, I tend to go more with the movement in that case as well.
Okay, that's good though, because I know a lot of times people don't talk about movement, and that is interesting. Now, since you do focus mostly on wildlife, but you obviously do a lot of other things too. If you're taking, let's say you're going to the Grand Canyon, what would you focus on there if you were trying to?
Yeah, so actually one of the challenges, I went to the Grand Canyon 2 years in a row. In the first year, I rafted down the Colorado River, and then the second year I went back and did a rim-to-rim hike.
Okay.
And what I learned the first year on the river was that it was really hard to take sunset shots, or even sunrise shots, because it's the best lighting, of course, but in the bottom of the canyon, the shadows are huge and they're harsh, and so it's very hard. By the time the sun gets up high enough to really get good lighting down below, you're looking at really bad lighting. It's really harsh, So I was trying to figure out a good way to do sunset, and my solution ended up being looking at the rapids in the Colorado River. I could see the reflection of the sunset on the canyon walls, which was showing up really golden on the blue water. And then I have a series that's 3 different shutter speeds of the exact same spot. And the first one, you can kind of see the shape of the canyons, and then it gets more like this mixing of the blue and the gold almost. And then the last one is just, it's all blurred. You can't really tell what you're looking at. But that was my solution to try and capture sunset in the canyon. So,
that's cool.
So I think a lot of times when I'm relying on the abstract, is trying to figure out, like, how do I tell this story? Because just the straight documentary style, of just taking a clean picture is not working. It's not the best way to convey either the feeling or like in that case, it was technically really hard to get the picture that I was hoping to get. And so this ended up being a good alternative.
Okay. It sounds to me, when you're doing your abstracts, you're searching for something.
It's a story. It's all about the story. Like, how am I going to tell that story in the best possible way? And for reflections, that's another thing I look for, the patterns, the movement, but reflections. So in that case, it was a reflection. I have another shot of a pool of water on the sand where in that case, it was actually, there was no panning or slow. I took a picture, but you could see the canyon very cleanly reflected in this pool on the sand, so you can see both at the same time.
And that's cool.
Yeah, and it was the reflection. So reflections is another way that I try and do abstract, but again, it's to tell a story. And so sometimes the best way to tell a story is like my nose-to-nose polar bear and wolf. The best way was documentary. I want to show you these 2 species facing off. Whereas the sunsets, like I wanted to show the motion and the river and the reflection and the fact that I was in the canyon. I wanted that all within the frame.
Okay, that's cool. I know. If I see a puddle or anything, I'm trying to figure out how to. If I see
take
something,
advantage of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't always work. In Cuba,
no, it doesn't.
I was trying every puddle I looked, and it was like there's a reflection of trash.
Awesome. I don't know. That tells a story too. Yeah. Probably not the story you wanted to tell, but it does tell a story.
They have a lot of trouble with their trash pickup, I think.
No doubt.
There's a lot of trash, but I didn't get one. Now, another trip we took to Cuba, we got so lucky because we went to dinner, and when we got out of dinner, it was raining, just drizzling, not raining hard, but we were in that beautiful, oh gosh, Cathedral Square. I think it was, is that what it's called?
Plaza de Cathedral.
Cathedral Square, yeah. And they have the cobblestones and everything was wet. It was so beautiful.
I bet. I've never been to Cuba.
It's only 1 hour
I
flight.
know. Like sometimes it's the close stuff you don't do, right?
I know. I know. So, all right, let's see, what else is there? Is there anything else? Okay, what are some ways to add an emotional element in your images? Oh, that was good, Heather.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, it goes down to the story. So, you know, like what's the story? What's the emotion I'm trying to convey? And so, like that bird that was helicoptering, I wanted to show the feeling of this slow motion up and down. And so by using the motion or the patterns, I try to get to what did it feel like to be there? Not just what does it look like, but what did it feel like, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the freeze frame of that bird just didn't do it justice.
Right.
And so I needed to show the emotion of, you know, like, this is how it felt to watch this bird. It was just kind of floating, you know?
So you would think, okay, I'm trying to do it because I don't think that way. So I'm trying to get myself into that. I have I'm not a real, as a photographer, I'm not a real right brain person. I'm sort of right in the middle. So sometimes people start saying that to me and I'm like, I don't get it, but let me try to get it. Okay, so I'm taking a picture. I want to show how I am feeling in the picture. That sounds hard to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes it's colors. You know, I've seen some shots that, well, actually, a lot of my Africa pictures, it's interesting when you're in Africa, it's all colors, right? I mean, a lot of browns and stuff, but it's color. And when I brought them back, I felt like a lot of them ended up like the zebras. I ended up converting to black and white because it was a better conveyance of the patterns and the feeling and the mood. But sometimes, like if you're in the fog, for example, I have some pictures that were almost monochrome anyway, and I went ahead and just switched them because it captured that moment more. It was kind of, you know, I mean, the Africa shots aren't necessarily dreary, but if you capture fog in monochrome, I mean, that just having that color creates a certain mood that goes along with it, you know. Or, you know, like if you choose lots of yellow or lots of red, I mean, those create moods.
You're right.
So I think part of it is, you know, are you trying to make a happy picture or a melancholy picture? And you think about the colors and the, again, sometimes if you're using softer lines, you get that more kind of muted feeling than if you're using these really bold patterns, and then you can get, you know.
Yeah, you're right. You know, it's funny you say that because I just worked on it because I told you about the artist studio tour I've been preparing for. And one of the pictures I took in this trip to Cuba, we went to Vinales, which is a mountainous area, but they're not big mountains, they're weird mountains. They're limestone, so they're really cool looking. And we stayed in the hotel that has the view. So we got up early and it was a very foggy morning. It was so cool. I mean, it was just, the hotel, you know, it was a Cuban hotel, so I was a little nervous to take people there.
You never know how it's going to work out.
Yeah,
right?
but the view,
was amazing.
View was worth it. But I used my long lens and I zoomed in on these palm trees in the fog, and I did the same, I did just what you were talking about. I started playing around with the colors when I had it in Photoshop or Lightroom, I can't remember, but I put it in black and white. I didn't quite like it, and then I added more of a glow, like an orange glow to it, and that was it.
Yeah.
And you're right, because it was early morning. Even though it didn't have an orange glow to it, it felt more like orange.
Yeah.
You know, when it felt more like morning when I put the orange glow to it. So, all right, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah, or like one of the things I was doing when I was in Antarctica is I was taking pictures of the birds from the boat, and they were, you know, they were flying and we were moving and the water was moving, and I was really loving the interaction between the sort of the shadows of the birds on the water, or the birds being captured as if they looked like shadows. And to me, it feels very tranquil. Those pictures feel very zen-like because you've got the blues. The birds ended up being either white or black, and you know, and often it would be, you know, kind of foggy. And so it kind of just had this feeling of more relaxed sense to it.
Yeah, you're right. Color really, really
Color
does
makes a
make
huge difference.
in your emotion, and I didn't think about that. You're right.
And I also think clarity, using the bold patterns versus softer
Yeah.
lines. I think that
Yeah,
that all
'cause
plays into it.
my foggy palm tree picture came out so cool, and
And people get a sense when they look at it.
Yeah.
They kind of know it's early morning, and it was, and that brings up, you're drawing out what people would feel in that situation, really.
yeah, and it's pretty.
Added bonus.
So lenses, anything goes. Just
Yeah.
depends on what you're shooting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
I
like
think
in
it's
the sand dunes,
situational.
that long lens helps you compress the image.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need a long lens for birding usually.
Yeah.
Should have
Most
had a
of the
short
time.
lens for the polar
I
bear.
know. Yeah, I normally have two lenses and two bodies. Generally one with the 24 to 105 and the other 100 to 400, so that I'm ready for both. But
Basically, whatever
if it's
happens.
pouring or if it's snowing, I was
If you're the abominable snow,
yeah,
you don't want to carry all that stuff.
Exactly.
Now, do you use filters or anything like that?
I use a polarizing filter.
Okay, good.
But I tell you what, I think that I've never played with it, but I've seen some really interesting stuff done with infrared filters and manipulations later that I think that you can create some serious abstracts, I think, with infrared as well.
I love infrared. In fact, I have a whole series of just they're not abstracts. They're just palm trees, but
they look abstract
so
when you
cool
use the
'cause they're
infrared,
white,
right?
Yeah, with a dark background, and that was if you want to come to the Artist Studio Tour, it's March 3rd and 4th. Go to what is the website? artistnaples.org, I believe, is the website. So
Sounds like a cool program.
It's a fundraiser for them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
They do it once a year. 6 artists are selected, and so it's a big honor. It's a big honor, but it's a lot of work.
Great.
It's a lot of work. So I've been through all my hard drives and all, you know what I mean. And then you're so critical of yourself. So I'm lucky to have Heather, who's an artist, to have a second eye, because she'll look at stuff that I'm like, you think that's good, really? So
Second opinion is always good.
oh yeah. And then like that, I told you about the Fusterlandia picture. She looked at it sideways, and it was cool sideways. When you put it upright, how I took it, it was not as cool. So, anyway. All right. What else? What else can we talk about abstracts? Any advice? Like, do you have 5 tips?
Yeah, well, for me, it always comes down to what's the story.
Okay.
So think about, first of all, what is the story you're trying to tell, and think beyond the box. Maybe you can't tell it in the first thing that comes to mind, which would be a more straightforward telling. So be open to that. I think be willing to play is a really big important tip.
With your settings, do you mean?
Play with the settings, play with the situation.
Turn your camera sideways.
Turn your camera sideways. But people, I've heard this said many times, and I think it's really true. You don't just take an amazing photograph, you create an amazing photograph. And so sometimes it takes time to figure out, okay, is slow motion working? Do I need it more fast, less fast? Maybe this angle's better, maybe that angle's better. So be willing to jump in there and try those different things to figure it out.
You really have to really think.
Yeah, you have to think.
Because I know sometimes I'm a very lazy photographer, where I just point and shoot. You know what I mean? And then other times it's like, I have to get a good shot here.
Yeah.
Come on, there's got to be something here.
And you know what? The beauty of digital now is you can take hundreds of photos, and if you got one that really worked, then that's the one, But it may have taken you a long time to figure out how to get that one, and at least you're not paying to develop all of those to get there. You can. It's fine to go and okay. Well, is it a close up? Is that the story I'm trying to say? Is it captured there, or do I need to pull back, or do I need to pan, or do I just let my subject move? So I think thinking about what the story is, and then being willing to really take the time to play with it. I mean, some things happen quickly. You don't have the chance to do that. But like that bird, I had more than one chance. I got to think about it because they kept going up and down.
How cool is that?
And so on the one hand, that one shot, it was right in the moment. But at least I had, a chance to think about it and come back to it.
Can we have that picture for the show notes?
Sure. Yeah.
So, because you've talked about it a lot, I
Yeah.
want to show the audience.
Yeah,
I want to see it too.
Yeah.
Especially this rare heron that sounds so cool.
Yeah, which also is cool. They change color on their cheeks during mating, so they can go to these like scarlet red or bright pink, and then white is their kind of normal. So they'll like flash the color when they're looking for a mate.
Ooh, sexy stuff.
Very sexy
man.
So I think those are important. For me, I like to do it all in camera because I like to do, or as much of it as I can in camera, because I like to feel, I like to feel like I'm capturing the moment as it was. And that's just kind of me being a bit of a purist, because I'm like, I feel like the experience is the most magical while you're standing there. So the more you can do in the moment, the better.
Okay.
And that's not to say I don't do any post-processing. I do cropping. I definitely crop, and then I normally am just kind of adjusting the whites and blacks to make sure I'm getting the full spectrum, and a little bit of clarity, not much more than that, but because I want it to be in the moment. And so that's part of why I will play in the moment, because you can't recreate that scene. So while you're there and you're in the moment and you're feeling whatever it is you were feeling to be inspired to take that picture, that's the best time to try and capture it the way that feels right.
Okay, good advice.
So those I think are all...
Yeah, no, that's really, really good stuff. So you don't do much of the post-processing?
I don't. I'm a minimalist when it comes to post-processing.
Yeah.
I feel very strongly that when I'm there is, I'll check the white balance. If it really looks off, I'll fix that. I'll do a little bit, but I mostly like to just capture it then and there the way it felt, because I feel like it's too easy to second guess and reinterpret once you're out of it. But the magic to me, for me, really, the root of everything is like, I love nature. I love being in nature, and that's where I want to spend my time. I don't want to spend my time at the computer. Yeah, it's a necessary evil, right?
Yeah.
But really, I want to be there and in the moment, and whatever it is I was experiencing then, I want to try and be as pure with that as possible. And so I try not to do a whole lot of post-processing.
Okay. I'm actually trying to, I was a film photographer first, because we didn't have digital back when I started, and the transition at first, I loved Photoshop so much in the beginning. I was like learning all these cool things, and now I'm tired. I'm tired of sitting at the computer. But I just lately have been trying to, okay, you've got to really, I bought Topaz, their suite or whatever it's called. I bought that 3 different times because I forgot I had it. Like, this looks really cool, and then I forgot. This looks really cool, and I forgot. So now I know I have it for sure, and I have the On1 suite, and I thought, I've got to start playing around with this stuff.
Yeah, I use Lightroom. I don't even really know how to use Photoshop, because I feel like it's too easy to get really into it then if I'm sitting there with Photoshop. Like, you can do so much, and I'm like, I want to just try and get it right, and so I really try and minimalize what I'm doing to it afterwards.
You did remind me of one other thing that we recommend often is when you're shooting, is to change your white balance to see.
Yes.
Because you can come out with some cool pictures if you have a different white balance. We had, and my example is when we were in Cuba, we just did this last minute stop. We were actually going for this drink, but it was near the fort. And so we went up to the fort, but it was the wrong time of day because the sun was blasting behind the fort, right? So I said, well, you know what, we'll do the starburst effect. So I taught everybody how to do the starburst effect, but it still wasn't that impressive, you know what I mean? And then I thought, you know what, this would be cool. Let's change our white balance to tungsten, and then it looks like nighttime with a big star behind the fort.
That's very cool.
And this fort was a silhouette. It came out really, really cool. And then, of course, we do a lot of sunset pictures on this side of the world. So we'll teach the people, change your white balance to shade or cloudy, and you'll get a cooler looking sunset.
And of course, in Miami, we're getting the sunrise, right? And it took the first few times I went out on the beach early to do shorebirds, I was like, why is everything looking so gray? This isn't how it feels. And I learned quickly that you had to pay attention to the white balance and switch it up, because otherwise the photos just looked so dull. I was like, they're not capturing the light at all. And so it's important.
And that's another thing. But you can do a lot of that in post-processing.
Yeah, you can.
However, here's one thing that I learned from preparing from the artist studio tour. So Heather was helping me choose pictures, so she came up with this really cool silhouette of these 4 cormorants. And I was like, oh, I love that picture, right? And of course, I only saved it as a low resolution file, stuck it on Instagram, and forgot about it, right? I found the raw file, but I couldn't find the edited file. And I couldn't remember how to recreate that file because I turned this bright daylight, and I did this totally in post-processing. I just took a picture because the shapes were cool of the cormorants. Say that word for me. Cormorant. It's a weird word.
It is a word.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But it was kind of backlit. It was a gray. It was ugly. So I turned it to this cool sunset-looking picture, and I made them darker. And I cannot remember how to do that to save my life. I couldn't recreate that thing. It's like, I think you need to document something when you come up with it. You know?
I often, especially if I'm actually playing with something with post-processing, which I often don't, but if I'm inspired by one that I'm like, I think there's something in here, I'll save it as a new virtual copy and so that I can completely mess with it and not worry about, losing it or saving it, or, I've got 2 separate files now.
I should have saved, maybe I did. I don't know if I saved it. I don't think I did save it as a high resolution file. I would have found it. But, I have a love-hate relationship with Lightroom because I am one of those people who does lose my catalogs and pictures because I swap hard drives so often because, there are a lot of people who work in my company.
Oh, yeah.
So we go through 3,000 to 5,000 pictures a week. And I don't like to risk those super large hard drives.
No, that's
because
why I just had a memory card crash on me. So yeah.
So I swap hard drives, and then Lightroom's, and I'm sure it's user error. And I do have like the leading Lightroom expert of Florida working here that I probably could, but I'm always in a hurry. It's like Joe's like, why don't you take my class? I'm like, oh, well.
For half a dozen years.
That's too
but
funny.
I'm always in a hurry, Jeez, I keep picking this up thinking it's going to work.
That's funny.
All right, so what's your next adventure?
Well, I'm actually going to be staying at home for the next year or so because I have a book deadline that's coming. I'm working on Dry Tortugas right now, but I also just last week signed a contract with University of Florida Press to do a coffee table book on Florida wildlife. And so I'm going to be, and I spent most of my time in South Florida, so I'm going to be spending the next several months doing forays up to North Florida and Central Florida to get more wildlife from up there as well. And
well, if you need some contacts, let me know because I know a lot of people at this point. Since I've had the show, I know even more. But Joe and I have been speaking
awesome.
around Florida for 8, 9 years, right? Long time.
That's awesome.
We've been speaking, so we know like all the photographers in Florida.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Because they can take you to the right spots.
Yeah, which is of course key. Knowing where to go is the first step.
I'm always surprised. We do like the Old Naples photo tour. We do Everglades tours. We do, we do a lot of photo tours here locally, and I'm surprised how few people hire photographers to take them around because every time I go somewhere, I hire a photographer. Like every time.
Yeah, and
because
it's
I
wise.
don't know where to go.
Yeah, it's wise.
And maybe they don't have the skill set I have. One guy in New Mexico, oh my gosh, if you ever go back there, this guy was awesome. His name is Bob Ayer, A-Y-R-E. And he was retired, and he loves photography. He's like, how can I make a living at this? So he just started doing photo tours. And he says, I don't teach because I don't really know that much about photography. I just like to get out there. But he took me
That's very cool.
from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Oh my gosh.
It was way too cheap. I hope he's raised his prices by now. But I mean, he took me to the coolest spots that I never would have known about.
That's cool.
And then, of course, I went to Tuscany, which is all farmland. How do you know where to go when it's all farmland?
Yeah.
So now I'm doing a joint photo trip to Tuscany with the guy who was my guide there because he was amazing.
Well, that's,
So it's
the way to do it for sure.
Yeah. So is that going to be your whole year? Is just traveling around Florida?
Yeah,
I'm so envious because I love Florida more than anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited because I've not spent much time exploring North Florida. I've spent lots of time exploring South Florida, but I'm excited to have an excuse to go.
Oh my God, I'm so envious. I'm like, am I turning green?
So yeah, I'm excited. So it'll be. I just got a big tent that goes on top of my Jeep, which I have not figured out how to use yet. But I'm like, I'll be ready. I can go and camp in the water. It won't matter. And yeah, I'm excited to be doing some exploring in my
Oh
own.
my gosh.
my own
that is
backyard.
so exciting.
So,
Well, our favorites, well, I'm speaking for Joe, like I have any. Anyway, my favorite spot is up in the Panhandle in the Apalachicola area.
Okay.
Have you been in there?
No, not. I mean, I've driven through. That's why I'm so excited about this. It's an excuse.
We do a photo tour there in May, which we have openings for, by the way, and our photo tours are limited to just 5 people, so gotta hurry up. But they had a lot of hurricane damage. I think people were afraid to sign up, but now we know everything's kind of back.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's going to take forever to be completely, but the places we go are fine. But anyway, yeah, let me know when you go there because I have people there too.
You got the hookup.
What happened was a lady who lives in that area came on one of my photo tours, and I don't remember how she found me, but she's like, if you ever come through here, just come and stay with me. I was like, I've never been to that area. So I had taken a long road trip, and I thought, I'm going to drive by. I'll stay with her for a couple days. So she showed me, the beaches, and I was like, oh, okay. I was kind of disappointed because it wasn't what I pictured. And everything's new up there in the beaches. Like, the towns are all
New buildings?
20 years old.
Oh.
I was so shocked by that. So anyway, I said, well, she's like, what did you think? I said, well, and she's like, well, what were you expecting? I said, I was expecting old Florida. She's like, oh, well then let me take you somewhere else. So she took me first to Apalachicola area, and then she told me about some other places because I went on my own, to Dead Lakes, and I forgot all the
Very
places
cool.
we go now. We went, yeah. And so I called Joe when I was still there. I'm like, we're doing photo tours up here. This place is amazing.
That's awesome.
So you're gonna love that area. It's the only place that I really haven't been at all is Jacksonville area. I don't know that area very well, but I hear it's beautiful.
Yeah, I've hit a couple
Augustine.
of state parks just outside of there when I was in Jacksonville for a conference, but
I don't know that area.
Yeah, I
St.
don't-
Augustine's is pretty. We do a photo tour to St. Augustine as well, but I've never really been I've cut through. I'm on.
Yeah,
you're
same
waiting,
thing.
I'm on the expressway. There it is.
Yeah.
So, oh my God. I'm
So that's my
happy
next
for
one.
you.
Yeah, I'm
So
excited.
you got a year
We've got a year
to get that book done.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. But what a fun project.
Yeah, and it's also nice because I'm also a writer, and I was trained as a biologist first and foremost, so I get to just kind of put it all together in this book. I'll be trying to talk about, the current conservation situation in Florida for all these different things. So it's going to include non-natives and endangered and a little bit of everything, and really try and be a snapshot of Florida wildlife today, and be able to rely on my biology background and to put a little bit of content in there, not just the photos, but yeah, I'm thrilled.
That's exciting. And what's your website? What's your blog?
It's KirstenNatureTravel.com.
And Kirsten is Kirsten.
Yeah, nature
Kirsten
travel.
NatureTravel.com.
Yes.
And that's where they can find you.
Yep,
Anybody
that's where you can find me, and links to my newsletter and social media and email. It's all on my website. So.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I hope you're going to be blogging about your Florida
I will
adventures.
be.
Because I'll be
I
following.
definitely will be.
'Cause that's one of my big things. I always say I want to do day trips. I want to do overnight trips, and then season hits, and I work 1,000 hours a week. It feels
And
like.
then you spend off-season recovering.
Well, then I travel in the off season
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I learned how to swap houses, so I travel
Oh, very cool.
pretty well. I can go longer periods of time when it doesn't cost.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pay for lodging.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
I'm not as rugged as you. I'm not camping. I'm not doing that. I think I've done that twice in my life, and that was.
Oh, I love it. I live for camping. I love it.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not going anywhere cold, and I'm not camping.
At least you have your standards.
Yes, that's for
you
sure.
know.
Well, thank you for being on the Understand Photography show.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
You were a great guest, and hopefully the audience got a lot out of that. Thanks for watching the Understand Photography show. I'm Peggy Farron. We'll see you next week.
Get up!